Janice Creasy also has been having some problems with her. Memorial service for Jerry Rapier, April 11th at 2 p.m. It is going to be located at the Illumina Lodge, and that is in Bryant. I'm going to put this flyer on the bulletin board so that you can get this address, and there's going to be a service for him. So Tammy wanted you to know that, and you're invited to come if you can come. And I'll put this on the bulletin board so you can get the pertinent information from that. Obviously, this coming Sunday is Easter Sunday. We will start that very early, 6:30 in the morning. We will be right out here in the front. Bring your chairs, lawn chairs and such, and we'll set up out in the parking lot. The stage will basically be under the portico, if you're familiar with that. If this is first time, just come, bring your lawn chair. Service will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 45 minutes, and a good time just to wake up on that Easter Sunday morning and remember the fact that Jesus rose again so many millennia ago, but it's still very present to us today. All the other regulars, not only will Dr. Jeff be presenting tonight, but he will also be presenting next week. This is a two-part series, so he will also be talking to us tonight. On the Saturday, April the 11th, there is going to be a singing at Central Baptist College. The church bus will leave at 4:45 p.m. There is a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board if you would like to go. We will have a guest speaker on April the 12th, Brother Paul McCrite, who is going to Norway to establish a church there, is going to be coming and telling us about that. All right, I think that's enough announcements for tonight. No, I forgot one. The Easter egg hunt that's happening at Primera Iglesia Bautista is going to be this coming Saturday. What time is that? 2 o'clock. Easter egg hunt, if you would like to go out, participate, help. 2 o'clock, and it's at their building out there. Any other announcements?
We're fixing the bags tomorrow night at 6.
Fixing bags tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, if you'll come and help do that. Okay? Others? Let me get out of the way. Dr. Jeff Mayfield.
Got me on? Okay. Your drink before I get started. Like I said at Big Creek when I talk, I'm a nervous wreck when I talk. I'm the deacon that likes to be seen and not heard. I'm not comfortable up here. Doug and Keaton like to run their mouth in front of everybody. I don't. So just know that I'm a nervous wreck. If I stutter over stuff, it has nothing to do with anything except that I am nervous. So we're going to talk a little bit about the medical aspects of crucifixion. Keaton, if you have the next slide for me. Okay, my credentials are not that outstanding. BS from the University of Arkansas, MD from UAMS, residency at UAMS, and I've been in practice for 30 years. My profession of faith and baptism was around age 8 to 9 at First Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in Sheridan. I've been a member of First Baptist Church since 1994. That's the year Susan and I got married. I've been a deacon at First Baptist Church and was ordained in 2008. Okay, married for 32 years, 3 children, 2 grandchildren. If anybody's not seen them, they need to see them. They're beautiful. Okay, that's just the way things are. Okay, I have no formal training in theology. If any of you are expecting that I'm going to get up here and give a theological lecture, you're out of your mind. It's not going to happen. I'm not qualified to do that. I don't have any special skills. I've got a lot of experience in healthcare, yes. In other words, I'm no more qualified to give this talk than anyone else. I just have a unique perspective on the crucifixion and can look a little further into what's presented to us in the Bible and make some educated guesses on what actually went through this. Next slide, if you could. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the medical conditions Jesus Christ experienced prior to the crucifixion, which is important. We're going to discuss the method of crucifixion and the events surrounding it, and we're going to expose the suffering Jesus Christ experienced. Just out of curiosity, how many of y'all have heard this talk from me before? Can y'all raise your hands? So a lot of people haven't. A lot of the slides that you've seen it before, you're going to recognize. Okay, they're the same slides I use. There's about 64 more slides that no one has seen outside of Big Creek Missionary Baptist Church or anyone that was there. And I believe, where is Brother Beard at? There he is. He heard my talk. He's come back for a second time. I don't know why. Okay? I guess he's a glutton for punishment, but he's here for a second time. So, but the big thing is, I want everybody to see what Jesus actually went through for each and every one of us and for all mankind. The information provided in this talk is factual, okay? The medical diagnosis, conditions, everything that we discuss is based on my opinion. I had to make a lot of estimates in this talk. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you have to kind of put things together and say what could have happened, okay? But that's it. Okay? Content of the talk, I do talk a little graphic. There's nothing that really should traumatize anyone. The nature of the subject in itself is graphic. So if you don't feel like your kids need to be in here, that's fine. I understand if it gets too much, but there's no graphic pictures, there's no graphic, really, there's some graphic descriptions, but I try to keep it toned down so that everybody could hear. All right, who has this image of Jesus on the cross? Anybody? This is the way I was always a kid. I thought, I see Jesus up there, his body pristine. I see a crown of thorns on his head with a nice, some kind of linen wrapped around his waistline. Anybody else have that image? Is that the thing y'all seen your entire life? That's what's presented, right? Because that's really what we want to see. I don't think it's what we need to see. My job on the next 2 nights is to basically show you that is not the image. And I want everybody to understand that's not the image. So next slide if you would, Keaton. What does the Bible tell us? Simple. He bled and died. Does it say much more? It talks a little bit about what happened, mainly timeline, theological events and references. But in essence, what it says is he bled and died. That's what we know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break down each aspect of what transpired and show you how much he bled and what he went through and what his body went through during the talk. Okay. Anybody can tell me what happened on June 6, 1944? Anybody? What? I couldn't hear you, buddy. Destruction of Pompeii. No, not quite. Not quite. Anybody else? Go ahead. D-Day. D-Day happened on that day. I can't believe somebody in here didn't answer. What's wrong with you people? You let one of the youngest kids in here answer the question. I've already bored you to death, and I just got started. I've been in what here, 5 minutes maybe tops? You're already, okay. Well, some of y'all may remember this movie. This is from the movie Saving Private Ryan, okay? Saving Private Ryan was a fictional story based on true events of one family. And the basis of the story, for those of you who have not seen it, there are 4 brothers that are in the European theater during World War II, okay? 3 of the brothers are killed on D-Day, okay? One of the brothers is somewhere in the European theater, and General Marshall orders a team of Army Rangers, if I remember correctly, to go find this guy and bring him home to his mother so she doesn't lose all of her children in World War II. Throughout the course of the movie, all of these soldiers die trying to find him and get him out. Okay? At the very last scene of the European theater, the actor playing the commanding officer is about to die. He's the last one to die. And he looks at James Francis Ryan, Private Ryan, and says, "Earn this." Okay? Earn this. If we can go to the next slide. At the very end of the movie, we see James Francis Ryan many years later, some 50 years later, an older man at Arlington Cemetery, and he walks up to the graveside of the commanding officer and he falls down on his knees and he's crying, and his wife runs up to him and he says, and she goes, "What is it?" And paraphrasing what he said, "Tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've lived a good life." We can't earn our salvation, okay? But in my opinion, and I'll speak for myself personally, I do so little to earn or even attempt to earn what's been freely given to me, which is what we're going to talk about. I want each and every person in this room to know what He did for each one of us and how bad He suffered. And again, I want to stress again, we can't earn this. It's something that has to be freely given to us because we ask that. But I want you to understand day by day what He actually gave up for you. So next slide if you would. All right. By the end of the talk, we're going to be able to reflect on what Jesus went through, the physical things He endured, and to be better than we currently are. Now I'm going to stop for a second because my nerves aren't gone yet. I'm going to tell a quick story. Is Brother Owen in here anywhere? There he is. I've been a member of this church maybe 2 months, maybe 3. Brother Owen comes up to me and says, "Would you teach my Sunday school class?" I had never taught a Sunday school class in my life, and like most of us throughout my years, I'd been more worried about goofing off, playing basketball, getting through college, getting to med school, getting through residency, getting married, all that kind of stuff. I'd never really focused on studying the Bible. So he tells me what he wants me to teach in his class. Okay? Of course, it's from Revelations, of all things. Okay? I don't think Brother John knew I'd never taught a class before. I think he thought I had, but I hadn't. And so I'm like going, great. Well, as I get to reading through the context of it, it's on the Church of Laodicea, which has a medical flavor to it, which makes it easier for me, which is why I think he asked. So I'm sitting up there in the old building, and I've got all the adults coming in, and my heart rate's high, and I'm scared. But I got this. I got it all. I've studied hard. I know it. And who comes walking in but O.R. Baldwin? Okay? All right? Who is a teacher, and did he have his doctorate, Brother Owen? He had his doctorate. He was an expert. Comes walking into my class. Well, I already didn't have to worry about, as I refer to him, because I love him so much, the big O, because he's not there to critique me. Okay? Now I've got Brother Baldwin there. So we get through the class, and very graciously he comes up and tells me that I did a really good job. I don't think I did, okay? But as I told Big Creek, I'm about as nervous right now as I was on that day, okay? So y'all bear with me if I stumble through stuff or things like that, but we'll get through it and we'll learn. Also, the talk is informal. If you've got questions, you can stop me, okay? I do have breaks for questions if you have them fairly frequently, but you're not going to bother me if you raise your hand or interrupt like that. I'm not going to tell you I can answer everything, but I'll do the best I can. So next slide if we could. All right, basic principles. I want everybody to remember this. This is our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, no doubt. Okay? He is a man. Okay? Now, we're going to put him up here on a pedestal, and we should, okay? But he's a man. He has the same physical body that you and I had. I don't know how tall he was or how much he weighed or anything else, except I know that he was 33-ish years old, which at that point in time was the average life expectancy for a male during that era, okay? Yes, he was a son of God, but he still had the same feelings, the same emotions, the same internal organs, the same muscle structure, the same everything that you have today. So as we go through this talk, it's fine to put him on a pedestal, okay, but remember, he's experiencing everything you would if this was you. Next slide. Okay, felt the same emotions. Now think about that one. Knowing what you're going to go through. Philip made a comment in a sermon a while back talking about the chosen, that when Jesus walked into Jerusalem with John, was it? That he looked up and he saw somebody on the cross when Jesus walked in? You know, a very moving scene. He knew what crucifixion was. He also knew in detail what was going to happen to him. Okay? Now put that in there. That to me right there is enough to make me want to turn and run. Okay? But he didn't. He kept quiet, and he did what his Father had commanded him to do. He had the same pain. There was special powers in Jesus Christ, no doubt. But I think that he experienced the exact same pain we would have without any restriction. The same fatigue. He didn't bleed any different than you guys did. Now, some of you that are on blood thinners are going to bleed more than others. I don't believe he was on a blood thinner because I don't think they had them at that time. But he still bled the same as we would. All right, so let's talk a little bit. This is the boring part of the talk, guys. Y'all are going to have to endure tonight to get through the next one, but I've got to set the stage for what he went through, okay? So we talked a little bit the last time I gave this talk about shock. Shock is a condition of acute peripheral circulatory failure due to derangement and blah, 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 okay? There's a lot of stuff the body goes through, but we're going to talk a little bit about hypovolemic shock, which is where all of these conditions result from insufficient blood volume, okay, needed for the maintenance of adequate cardiac output, blood pressure, tissue perfusion, the things that your body does every day that you don't realize. We get in a situation where we don't have that. We don't have the means to do that. Shock is severe circulatory failure. It's marked by reduction in blood flow to vital organs. Okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about how the body prioritizes that and what he went through. It results in cell damage and cell death. Now, for the younger people or the people that have been in science classes before, cells are what make up tissue, tissue makes up organs, and organs what make us us. And there are several of those. So when the cells are damaged and die, the tissue dies, and when the tissue dies, you die. That's just the way it works. Slide. Okay. What is the markings of shock? Hypovolemic shock primarily. Low blood pressure, high heart rate. I won't ask if anybody in the room's had AFib or supraventricular tachycardia, but those conditions when your heart rate's running 150, 160, you are miserable. Okay? You can't describe it. It's not like when you're exercising at that heart rate. Your body's not geared up to do that. It is a horrible situation. Your breathing rate goes up. That's important because when we get on the cross, things are going to happen that involve respiration, which we'll talk about next week. Pulmonary edema, which is fluid on the lungs. Some of y'all may have had congestive heart failure in the past and know what it's like, but in essence, it's similar to drowning, except it's an internal type of fluid. Electrolyte abnormalities, think about potassium, think about muscle cramps as we go through this talk and things like that, okay? And the skin becomes cool and pale. That's an important issue too. Next slide. All right. Hypovolemic shock occurs when a person loses 15 to 20% of their blood volume. A typical male has 5,000 to 6,000 milliliters of blood. Now I'm going to say this, if you are a medical person, this talk is for lay people, not for medical people, okay? So if you are a medical person, you're like going, well, he needs to explain that further, that's not going to happen. I'll be happy to talk to you about it after, but we're going to talk about it here. But let's assume that Jesus had 55 milliliters of blood to start with, okay? That's our starting point. 20% loss equals 1,100 milliliters of blood, okay? At 40% blood loss, 2,200 mLs, you are considered critical. If I'm taking care of you, I am hunting an ICU bed in a hurry, and I'm calling somebody saying we're in trouble, okay? We're getting in a bad situation. So let's break it down into classes, because as we go through the things that Jesus went through, He's going to go through different stages of shock. It's going to be a progressive thing. Okay? A lot of it happens very quickly in one event, but it is a progressive event. So hypovolemic shock is when you lose up to 15% of your total blood volume. 750 mLs in an average. It can start at 400 mLs of blood. Okay? Let's say half a pint. You lose half a pint of blood, you're going to start to have these symptoms, but the medical data says 750 mLs, okay? Heart rate is usually normal or slightly elevated. I think Jesus probably was elevated at the start because he knew what was going to happen. Okay, I know mine would have been. I probably would have already been up at 130, 140. But the heart rate's usually normal in this situation. Blood pressure's normal. Your body has mechanisms that kick in and make that happen and make it do what it's supposed to. Respiratory rate's normal. Urine output is typically normal. 30 mils per hour is a normal person. If I'm running a race, it seems to be far higher than that because I have to stop at the bathroom every time I turn around. But mental status, you're slightly anxious, but really no significant change. Body's natural mechanisms kick in, and there's a lot of things that happen with blood vessels and things like that that help us maintain our blood pressure, pulse, and everything else. This is often difficult as a physician to detect. Okay, you kind of have to assume if you're in a trauma situation, the ER, you've got to assume that they're headed that direction based on their blood loss, even though they're showing no physical findings. When you get into class 2, shock, maybe. There you go. Thanks, sir. 15 to 30% of your total blood volume, 750 to 1,500 mLs roughly. Heart rate becomes greater than 100. Blood pressure stays normal. Okay. Our body has a formula we use called cardiac output so that if the blood pressure starts to drop, the heart rate's going to go up. That'll maintain your blood pressure for a certain period of time. Respiratory rate gets higher. Again, I talked about when we go through the crucifixion, actual crucifixion, that's going to be important. Okay? Urine output becomes slightly decreased. Mild anxiety is what I see out of most of my patients at this point. They're typically a little bit twitchy. They're uncomfortable in the bed. I can't imagine Jesus was any different. But part of our nervous system is going to start activating and start compensating for that still at this stage. Next slide. Class 3, we've got 30 to 40%, so 1,500 to 2,000 mLs. As I'll show you later, I think this happens pretty quickly in Christ's suffering. Heart rate's elevated, 120. Heart rate 120 for most of us is not comfortable, it's not bad. Blood pressure starts to drop. Now when that happens, you're feeling it. Anybody want to admit to having low blood pressure? I've had it before. Anybody had it before? You get a little lightheaded. You start getting a little anxious. Some people even get confused at this stage, and most do. Their thinking's not as quick as it was. When you ask them a question, it's like it takes them 15 seconds to answer you. Okay, so you're not processing as well as you should. But again, the body's mechanisms are trying to kick in and protect this, but they're starting to fail at this point. In other words, your body can't compensate and keep up with it. Okay, you're bad at this point. Okay, this is a critical thing. Next slide. Last one, I promise. Blood loss, 40% of the total blood volume, about 2,000 milliliters of blood. Remember, we started out with 5,500. Heart rate's very high, greater than 140. Blood pressure is low, probably in the 80 over 50 range, if I was guessing. Breathing rate is 35 times per minute. Why is that important? Remember, with our respiratory muscles, they're like any other muscle, they'll fatigue. Okay? You start to do something activity-wise, eventually your muscles are going to start to fatigue and cramp up. The respiratory muscles are no different. So we're going to have a situation where somebody's having difficulty breathing already, and they're having to breathe faster to keep up with their body systems. Okay? Urine output is gone. They're not putting out any urine at this point in time. They're lethargic, confused, or even unconscious at this point. Okay? Next slide. All right, questions on shock. Does everybody have a pretty good idea what we're talking about? Yes, ma'am.
What's lethargic?
Do what?
What's lethargic?
I don't know, but I can't hear you, baby. I'm sorry, I'm hard to hear. Oh, tired, fatigued, can't move very well. Like you are when you wake up on Saturday morning. How about that? That work? That better?
I wake up early on
Nah, I figured as much. Just don't listen to her. She's like a freak of nature, I think. So, all right. Not a freak, but a freak of nature, okay? Next slide. I'm sorry, any other questions, anybody? No, I explained it that well. Everybody understands it? Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about timelines. So here we are, Thursday night, okay, roughly. Philip's going to probably correct me on that. 6 to 9 p.m. is the Last Supper. Okay? At 10 o'clock, Jesus leaves for Gethsemane with the disciples. Okay? Now, the location they're in southwest Jerusalem. They're headed to northeast Jerusalem, which is about a mile away. Okay? So, 6 to 9 at night, I'm guessing the temperature at that stage is probably somewhere around 60 degrees at that time. I mean, you don't know that for sure, but we suspect. So, it's cool. Okay? For the summertime, it's cold. For the wintertime, it's really hot around here if you're 60 degrees. But, I mean, it was a cool night at that point. Next slide, Keaton. Sorry about that. 11-2. Where did I drop that at? I told y'all it was going to be this way. 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., prayer in the garden. Okay? Now, I'm going to plug up for the disciples here, for the apostles. Okay? If I had to sit there in the cold night air for that long, I would have been asleep too. As my wife will tell you, at night, if I get still around 9:30 at night, I fall asleep on the couch or in the floor. Okay? Then for some reason she says, "Are you asleep?" I guess I get that, but anyway. But I mean, Jesus was there for a long time. They were there for a long time, and they were probably tired. I don't know when any of these men slept last. It may have been longer than 24 hours already, and I suspect it was. I knew if it was my last day on earth and my last chance to do anything, I would be making every minute count. So I suspect they'd been up for a while. Okay, I suspect they'd all been up for a while following Jesus around. So prayer in the garden from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Next slide. Okay. First medical part we're going to talk about, okay? Luke 22:44, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Okay? Has anybody ever seen that happen? I have not. Okay? Next slide, if you would, Keaton. Okay. The term for this is called hematidrosis, or as I like to call it, hematohydrosis, because that makes more sense to me. It's a very rare condition in which a human being sweats blood. How can that happen? Next slide, if you would. Okay? It's extremely rare. Generally, it's benign. It doesn't mean anything. Blood oozes or sweat, bloody sweat oozes from the skin. Typically, it'll occur on the face, forehead, nose, eyes. It could occur anywhere, but that's where it normally comes from. Okay, so let's talk a little anatomy here. What you have is the superficial layers of skin. You have sweat glands coming through. You have hair coming over your body. Okay? Then you have some sebaceous glands, which are oil glands, which help kind of keep the skin moist and like it should be. And then below it you have loops of blood vessels called capillary beds. Now, capillary beds are real thin blood vessels. Imagine taking 10 hairs off your head, twisting them together, and making this huge web of blood vessels that are supplying that area of tissue. That's the best description I can give with that, okay? But what happens is the blood vessels will constrict. One of our body's mechanisms, they'll constrict down, okay? The capillaries around the sweat glands become fragile and start leaking blood, or they burst open, releasing the pigment in blood called heme in with the sweat glands, okay? So that when the person perspires, it appears as great drops of blood. Okay, next slide if you would. Cause is unknown. Extreme fear, severe stress, intense physical exertion on the reported cases that we have in our medical literature. Okay, next slide. There's 40 reported cases that I could find since 1880. In my first talk, I reported 70. When I went back and did another literature search, I could only find 40. And all of them seem to occur typically in high emotional states. Fear, intense mental thought was one of the things that was listed in the talks. Typically losing about 5 milliliters of blood. Okay, which is not a whole lot. I mean, that's not very much at all, about a teaspoon if you're looking at it. I can put myself in a situation where I know what's going to happen. You're fine staying there. But I would be stressed beyond belief. But that's how earnestly and how hard Jesus was praying, how concerned he was. I can't speak to anxiety in a man and how much there was. I just can't see there not being anxiety. I understand that sometimes is portrayed as a lack of faith. I just don't know what was going on in this man's head at the time. I do know he was a man. I know he had the same emotions that we have. I know what state of mind I would have been at that point in time. Outside of running away, I know what state of mind I would have been in. So what complications do we get into? It's preceded by pain and tingling of the skin. Okay. Now you can imagine the reports from back in 1800 were not that great, and the reports are not that good anyway because it's very poorly described. But all of them that I could read over the last 50 to 60 years, it hurt before it started. Okay. Caused the skin to be very sensitive. Okay. In the cool night air, it probably caused chills. By 2 in the morning, we're probably at 50 to 55 degrees. Don't know that, but that's a pretty cool temperature, especially if you're sweating on top of that and you're sweating blood. Maybe mild dehydration. I would say the mild dehydration at this point would probably be from not eating, probably not drinking as much. I mean, pretty active at that time, moving from place to place, walking a mile in the night air. Very seldom does your blood volume, very seldom do you become hypovolemic in this situation. 5 milliliters of blood doesn't cause that, okay? But that's where the sweating of blood probably came from. So Jesus is a very rare situation to be so intent and so thoughtful and so whatever he may have been going through to be able to sweat blood. Again, 40 cases since 1880. Next slide, please. Okay. Hypovolemic shock, none at this point. He's still in his normal state of health. Okay, he's not having any physical findings outside of just the emotional turmoil that's going on. Next slide, if you could. Okay, so timeline, 1:30 to 2 a.m. Jesus is arrested. Okay, he is escorted to the house of Annas, about 1/3 of a mile. Okay, total distance he's traveled is about 1.33 miles. The house of Caiaphas after that was probably located close by or in the same complex. So there's not a travel time involved. Blood loss, we talked about a minute ago. We've lost 5 mL of blood so far. Next slide. Okay. Now the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him, and having blindfolded him, they struck him in the face and asked him, saying, "Prophesy." Okay. First beating was sometime between 1:30 and 3 a.m. We don't know. I don't know exactly. I couldn't find that. But to beat him, if you translate it, literally means to hit with a clenched fist. Okay? They beat him in the face. Okay? Jesus may have been beaten so badly you wouldn't recognize him, and I suspect he probably was. Think about the hatred. If you're hating somebody enough that you're willing to release a probable killer and have him crucified, there's a certain amount of hatred there that I don't understand. Okay? But if you hate somebody that bad, imagine how badly he was beaten. And I don't think it was they hit him a couple times and backed off. I think it was probably a beat down, as we would call it. Okay? First beating, just probable injuries. Eyes swollen, probably swollen shut. Okay? He was blindfolded. They had no idea where they're hitting him, nor did they care. Nose bleeding, lips busted and swollen, multiple lacerations. We don't know how many, but I know it doesn't take a whole lot with the scalp, structure of the scalp, which we'll talk about in the next talk, for it to bleed a whole lot. Okay? Multiple hematomas on the scalp, bruises, knots. Okay? Skin was already tender from hematohidrosis. We talked about that. Okay, that's one of those things that happened. And we don't know what environment or temperature he was in. Next slide, if we could. Nosebleeds typically lose about 100 milliliters of blood. Sometimes you lose more. People in this room can attest to that, can't they? I mean, sometimes you lose more blood than that. Let's assume that the bleeding was severe, 50 to 100 milliliters of blood. Scalp lacerations. Typically, with a scalp laceration, if somebody comes in and their head is cut open and I'm having to suture it up, we're talking about losing between 100 and 300 milliliters of blood. Okay? Let's assume that there were several Okay? This is a very kind estimate on my part. I think it was far more than this, but let's just say 300 milliliters of blood from the scalp laceration. Next slide, if you could. So, normal male blood volume, we suspect Jesus had 5,500 mLs. Hematohydrosis 5 mLs, first beating 400 mLs total. We're at 5095. We're in good shape. Next slide if we could. I think there was more blood than that, and I think that he was probably in class 1 hypovolemic shock at this point. But you put the numbers together, they don't corroborate that. Okay, I think we're close. You know, this is where you're losing 15% of your blood volume. Heart rate's normal, blood pressure's normal, breathing's normal, urine output's normal, mental status slightly anxious. Nothing more than that. Again, we talked about it's often difficult to detect. So I suspect outside of his physical injuries and the swelling and things like that and being bloody at this point, I think he was okay. Okay, I think that, you know, he's in charge of all of his faculties and able to get up and move around and do the things any of us would be able to do, provided there wasn't a bad head injury, which I can't even comment on at this point. I don't know that. Next slide. Emotional trauma. Look at that. That's one thing I have a tendency to forget, okay? Where are his friends at? You think about that? I mean, you know, has anybody ever been abandoned by their friends? You know, there's a bro code when I was growing up that if a guy had a chance to get with a young lady on an evening, it was okay to leave. Outside of that, girls, I don't think feel that way. I think if a girl leaves in a teenage situation, they're not considered friendly. So, but he'd been denied by Peter. The same man who I think was trying to split the guard's head wide open and missed. He's just a bad shot because he was angry and cut the guy's ear off. The same guy who was willing to go to whatever ends to protect him is now denied him 3 times. He's mocked by the soldiers. He was rejected by his people. His apostles, I think, were probably scurrying around. I think they were close in witnessing some of this. I can't back that up. But his apostles are nowhere to be found. He has to be exhausted. We don't know when he slept last. But again, it's safe to say he's been up for over 24 hours. Now, to me, I get nauseated and a little bit of a headache, and I become gripey. Right, Mallory? When I've been up longer than 24 hours, would that be fair to say? So, anyway, it's safe to say he's been up for a while. But don't forget the emotional trauma. He is a man. He's going through the same thing. Next slide, please. Okay, travel to Pilate's Praetorium. Distance is about a half a mile. Okay, so the total distance Jesus has traveled so far is 1.83 miles roughly. 55 degrees. Soldiers made a fire, so we know it had to be somewhat cool. The Bible does tell us that. And I don't know why that was put in there. It was for a reason, so I'm assuming that was to tell us it wasn't a warm night that this happened on. Next slide. Okay. Pilate sends Jesus to Herod's residence. The distance is negligible, as they're probably close. We're probably at about 7 a.m., okay? So we're about 13 hours in from when he first started the Last Supper. Next slide. State of his mind and body, he's hurting. He's been beaten badly. Okay, I've never been in any kind of altercation where I got beaten that badly, but I've been hit before, and it's not a fun thing. Okay, tired, bleeding. I suspect there's still some active bleeding going on. Most of the time with scalp lacerations, they keep bleeding for a little bit. Probably thirsty and dehydrated. Okay, we're not told he had anything to eat or drink, but my assumption is he didn't have anything after the Last Supper and after he got arrested. Okay, he's alone, and most importantly, he knows what's about to happen. He knows what's coming next. Next slide. Okay, so heart rate's high, lower than normal blood pressure at this point. He's lightheaded and dizzy, probably hitting the head. Maybe a headache, maybe a concussion, probably so, I don't know. Eyes are swollen, possibly swollen shut, blood in your eyes. Okay, kind of a bad situation all the way around. Next slide. Okay, the point is, Jesus is in a very bad place physically and mentally. He is the Son of God, yes, but he is a man. And we're sitting at 8 a.m. Okay, we've just gotten started with the punishment he's going to endure, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Now put that in perspective from his arrest at 1:30 to 2, 3, somewhere in there. And now we're at 8 o'clock in the morning and all this has already happened. All right, questions from anybody on the timeline and where we're at after the first beating?
Can I make a comment?
Glenn, I would expect no less. And I meant that with all the love that can be mustered up at this point. So,
I think I read a commentary from John 13 to 17 happened in about 24 hours from.
are you going to steal my thunder?
I'm just saying.
Okay,
it'd been
'cause you
up
need to stop
24
if you
hours
are.
before all this started happening. So he should be tired.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Fatigued.
And I'm just picking at Glenn. I love Glenn. I've been hitting him in the back of the head with basketballs for years. It's not a big deal. So, any other questions?
Help us with a milliliter. And like, give us.
Let's talk about a drop. 5 milliliters is 1 teaspoon. A tablespoon is 15 milliliters. A pint, or if you get a liter of fluid, that's 1,000 milliliters. So if you see a bag hanging in the hospital, that's 1,000 milliliters. If it's a small bag, it's half a milliliter. It's half of a liter. So, I mean, you're talking about about half a bag of IV fluid at this point in time that he's lost. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Nobody? Everybody understands it so well? Brother John, you got nothing? Nothing? Okay. All right. Next slide. Trial before Pilate, 8 to 9 a.m. Okay? It says, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Okay? Next slide. Scourging and crucifixion. Now, this is one of my slides from the original talk. The Romans didn't invent crucifixion. They perfected it. Okay? I have this image of competitive young soldiers, okay, who have tried to master their art. Okay? They perfected it as a form of torture and capital punishment. They were good at it. They were violent, but violent in a way that kept people alive as long as they could. Now, I don't know, but my image of these guys is, hey, how long can we keep this one alive and still make him hurt so bad? I mean, young guys are young guys. I don't care who you are. We're going to get competitive, and we're going to see if we can outdo the other one. Did they keep a record book? I don't know. But these are extremely violent events. Okay? In my opinion, this is as or more violent than the crucifixion. Okay, with what happens, which we'll talk about. The goal that they had was to produce a slow death with maximal pain and suffering. Now let that burn in. That is your Lord and Savior, that they're trying to produce a slow death with maximal pain and punishment and suffering. Okay? And they're experts at it. They do this all the time. This is routine to them. The people that are scourging are well equipped to do so. I told the other night, I remember watching Ben-Hur, one of the Ben-Hur movies, and the soldier talked about that with his whip he could flick a fly off of his horse's ear at a dead run and never touch the horse's ear. Okay? Very skilled individuals. They perfected their trade. Next slide. Scourging was preliminary to every Roman execution. The purpose was to weaken the victim through blood loss, hypovolemic shock. Okay? The instrument they used was a short whip or a flagellum. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about the next slide. The flagella itself was short. It is about 2 feet long total, probably. Okay? It consisted of 3 separate thongs, usually. If I can get my thing to work here. 3 separate thongs that they had both metal, bone, or both in them. Okay? So they would typically have a ball on one place or several places on here where that the flagellum would land on the skin, make good contact where the bone could grab and tear. Okay? Now, you know, the pieces of bone are probably sharp. I don't know if anybody's ever been accidentally hit with the whip or not, but I have, and I mean, that's bad enough as it is. I mean, I thought that I died the one time I actually got hit with one. Okay? Imagine that, a bunch of teenage boys messing around with a bullwhip and somebody gets hit with it. Imagine that happens. But anyway, the wooden handle is about 8 inches long, while the leather thongs were about a foot long. Okay, so we're not dealing with a long thing. I always had this image when I was a kid growing up that this guy was standing 5 to 10 feet away with a long bullwhip like you see on TV. No, they were right there. They were right there where they could get as much torque as they could on the whip and make as hard a contact as they could. The metal balls hit, the bone grabs the skin, and down they pull, okay, over and over again. The multiple lengths of the thongs were designed to prevent the balls from hitting each other. They wanted to make sure they made good contact with every hit, okay, causing more damage to the victim. Again, the overall length of the flagrum or flagellum was about 2 feet long. I don't know that for sure, but just historically, that's what I was able to find. Next slide. So, and we're going to wrap up pretty quick here tonight, but the way that scourging was handled at that point in time, this is typical. Of course, the victim typically had no clothing. From what I've read, this was a public forum. Okay? We've already talked about anxiousness. All of us get embarrassed in this situation. The victim was typically tied by their hands to the top of the post. Okay? They're hanging, their knees are typically bent. I don't know if they forced them in that position or not. Okay? All I know is I imagine a man who is not able to see very well, that has already been beaten up very badly, and them dragging him up and basically hitting, kicking, or whatever, trying to get him tied up. I don't see Jesus resisting because he hasn't resisted to this point. Okay? If he did, it was not a conscious decision that was made, but I think he did it willingly. But I can't imagine this is a nice process to be tied up this way. I can't imagine it's a comfortable situation to be tied up that way. And I can't imagine knowing what's going to happen to you. Okay? They're typically tied with the knees bent. When they did strike with the flagellum, they were typically coming up and going down at an angle. Okay? And there's a reason for that we'll talk about. But again, that also gives them more surface area, more distance to cover if you're coming down at an angle. Okay? It allows them to create more tissue damage. It also, as we'll talk about, allows you to experience more pain. Okay? You know, I don't know how many times Jesus was whipped. I got this question the first time I gave this talk. I have no idea. I'm not a theologian, as I said. Typical Jewish tradition called for 39. I would bet the Romans wanted to do better than that because they kind of felt like they were better than everybody else, especially the Israelites at this time. Okay? So I don't know how many times he was hit. It had to be multiple. The one thing I do want you to remember is we have this nice little image of it just hitting the back. I don't think it was just hitting the back because in this position, there's no way that it didn't wrap around. There's no way we weren't hitting down into the buttocks area. Okay? There's no reason to think that it wasn't hitting the upper legs. Okay? Just a speculation, but this diagram shows all the way down to the buttocks. Maybe that's where they stopped. I don't know. That's just what the diagram shows. But the point is, you've got blows to all these areas. You've got tissue being torn in all these areas. You have massive blood loss. Okay? We get a cut like that. I get a cut on a bone. I mean, if I'm cleaning something or something like that, or I get finned by a fish, I think I'm going to die. Okay? And we're like, oh my gosh, you know, that happened. You know, imagine this one. Imagine this one. Next slide if we could. The initial blows would have opened all the way to through the skin into the subcutaneous tissue, okay, tearing through all of this down into the capillaries bed and actually down below into the subcutaneous fat. Okay, now I don't know if all of y'all have seen wounds or not, but you get to a point where you hit fat and then below the fat you hit the muscle. All of this has a very high amount of blood vessels, high vasculature. It bleeds a lot. Okay, so again, tearing through all of the skin. Next slide. We're going to go ahead and talk about muscle damage. This will be the last thing I talk about tonight because I don't want to run long on time. I want to be respectful of the choir. But when the muscle damage occurs, when you go through the skin, you go through the epidermis and the dermis, down into the subcutaneous fat, into the muscle tissue, you're tearing nerves as well. Okay? And if you tear a nerve, it is a type of electrical pain that I don't know if I can describe. Okay, I don't have a good description of that. But imagine electrical pains every time you tear through a different nerve. Okay, I know that when I have to give myself a shot, sometimes I hit a nerve ending and it burns like fire. Okay, this is happening repetitively, and it's not like there's just one nerve running through an area. There are nerves running all through the areas that are being involved. So just remember that the muscles themselves have nerve endings as well. They're not just a hunk of meat laying there like when you cut your steak at a restaurant or something. Next slide. So go through the muscles that were possibly and most likely torn. The superficial muscles, and we have several on the chest, and yes, I feel like that it wrapped all the way around to the front of his chest. I know that if I wanted to inflict maximal pain, I would be wrapping it all the way around with every blow. I'd be trying to take it as much as I could. Can I prove that happened? Nope, I can't. Not even close. But you've got superficial muscles. Some people are bigger up in this area. Some men have a bigger chest muscle. Some people are like me that don't have hardly any. So how much they were tearing through, but I'm guessing there's probably in this situation with the state of time and his age, probably about 2 inches of muscle thickness, maybe more, okay, that we're tearing into. You've got some other muscles that are not as big. I want us to concentrate on these on the side. The external obliques and the serratus anterior. These are thin muscles. Okay, you don't believe it? Press on your side, and how close are your ribs? There's not much there. Maybe, if we're lucky, 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Now some of us have a little bit more around the midsection than others, but most of the time this area is preserved and it's not very thick.
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
Because you moved your hands. He's been trying to distract me the entire time. He's making faces up here, everything, things that I would do to him if it was me. But anyway, no, I wasn't looking at you, Philip. No, I wasn't looking at Vicki for sure. Thank you. You and I are going to have a discussion after this. So is it too late to institute annual call again, or can we do that? Okay. So anyway, but the point is these muscles are thin. We know that they're hitting this area. We know that when they are scourging him, they're hitting these thin muscular areas, okay? And then I don't know that we got into the abdominal muscles. I know that we got into the superficial muscles because of the way things are working on this. Did they get down into the muscles on the front of the leg? Probably not, okay? But that's always possible. Next slide. Deep muscles torn, the serratus anterior, which are below the external obliques. So these muscles over here are actually below these over here. And then you've got 3 layers of muscle, which are called intercostal muscles, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. Okay? Next slide. Okay. And then, of course, on the back muscles, we usually have bigger, thicker back muscles. You know, I mean, it may be 2 to 3 inches depending on the individual and what they've done in their life, okay? We've all heard of these muscles before. The deltoids are up in the shoulders. You've got the latissimus dorsi and the trapezius, which are big kind of triangular muscles that go through here. All those muscles for sure are being ripped to shreds, okay? How deep can they go with this? I don't know. I don't know that on the back that they could go too terribly deep. I don't think they could go down to the bone in that area, but that is possible with the way that these things were made. Okay, last couple of slides here. Okay, other muscles of the back. How did that get up there? Next one if you could. Go ahead, pass that one, Keaton. All right. Peter's description of the scourging. Okay, and this is where we're going to stop our talk. Important slide. 1 Peter 2:24. By whose stripes you are healed. Okay? By whose stripes you are healed. The stripes, of course, are what we've been talking about. Stripes in this context is singular. Now, you can interpret the Bible in one of 2 ways. You can interpret literally, or you can interpret symbolically. Just my opinion on things, okay? I interpret the Bible literally. Okay, now there are those experts in the room that have their doctorate in theology and other theological educations that are going to give you a possible different answer to this if they want to. But with stripes being in a singular context, it is implying that the back of our Lord and Savior looked like one huge wound. Not a bunch of wounds, not a bunch of lines across like we see, like we think about, but one massive torn wound, one open wound. If I had to stitch it up, there would be no way I could even start. Okay? And that to me is important, because that means that it is so torn up, so macerated, that you can't identify what structures are what. Just one big wound. Now, Philip can talk sometime about the other. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay? So, I would very much like to stop there and take questions if I could. We've got just a very few minutes left before we run out of time. And anything you've got, any comments, and Glenn, please don't hesitate. I picked on you a minute ago because I love you, but it's the way things are. Any questions anybody has up to this point? The next part of the talk does get a lot more interesting. We go a lot more into the stages of shock. We go a lot more into the injuries that are occurring, the pain that he went through, and things like that. But any questions? Yes, sir.
Do you think the soldiers were actually forced not to kill him because they needed to complete the crucifixion?
I don't think they were forced not to kill him. This is speculation. I think they got in trouble if they did.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I think they probably got in trouble if they did. Now that's history 101 to me, and that was a question I asked in my history classes in college, and I never got a direct answer. But I can't imagine if somebody is sentenced to death by crucifixion and you killed them beforehand, I can't imagine you wouldn't be in trouble. Answer? Is that okay? Anybody else? Come on, guys. Y'all are being shy. There are no dumb questions in this lecture except the ones that I ask.
I have a quick comment, and I was going to say this later, but there's a lot of historical descriptions of crucifixions because they were such a public event, they were so traumatic. And there was several examples of guys who did not survive scourgings. Mm-hmm. They were killed in the process of being scourged. And just as you said, soldiers got in trouble for that. They wanted them to go to the cross because that was a public display to deter whatever crime they were guilty of. And they were not to kill them, but a lot of them did. And then the other comment that I was going to make was the wine mixed with gall that they offered Jesus as soon as he got to the cross. That wasn't to numb the pain of the cross. It was to numb the pain that he was already suffering. Because they were trying to numb that pain to keep him alive so that he would not go into shock as you're describing.
That was not in my talk, so you didn't ruin my thunder, but you got real close. All right, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Was the scourging public?
Yes, I think it was.
It definitely was.
Yeah. That's where you get into theology and outside of the medical part of it, but I think it was, yeah. And I'm going to apologize this side of the room. Keaton put the monitor on that side. That's all I can say. So what I'm reading off of is right there. So it's not y'all's fault. I apologize. Actually, I was trying to stay away from Larry as far as I could, but other questions?
Your friend.
Yes, sir.
I don't have my
This is Glenn
scripture.
Vardaman, by the way, if y'all don't know. So.
I don't have my scripture reference, but one of the Messianic Psalms says that he looked down and he can see his bones, and that may be ribs or maybe after the scourging.
That's two,
That
Glenn.
something
That's
was
two.
visible.
That's two.
Okay.
Once again, that's next week, Glenn. So,
Third time I'm in trouble.
so I'm not coming back next week. I don't know. It's just my whole talk's gone. Yeah. No, that's correct. You are right.
You are coming back next week.
Anybody else? Anthony, you got nothing, seriously. He's my friend. He's not going to do that to me, so. All right. This kind of the direction everybody wants to go. Everybody good with this? Y'all hearing what you want to hear? Okay. I got a thumbs up from the back row. All right, I'll turn it back to Brother Philip. Thank y'all very much for listening. I appreciate it very much. So.
Well, no, it's not what I wanted to hear. But, you know, it is good. As we say, it's good to do hard things. It is good for us to visit the cross in this kind of graphic detail. You know, do y'all remember when The Passion of the Christ came out? Y'all remember that? If you haven't watched The Passion of the Christ, I'm not going to tell you that everything is correct. I can watch a movie and I don't believe that everything on TV is true. All right? I watch movies all the time about books that I have read. I do that all the time. But I read the book first. Because if you watch the movie first, it ruins the book. So read the book first. But go ahead and watch the movie. And I didn't like some of the Catholicism in the Passion of the Christ, but here's the one thing I did like. The realistic nature of the crucifixion. And it is the reason that it had such a rating. People criticized it because it was an R-rated movie, isn't that right? Well, it wasn't because there were sex scenes or stuff like that in it. It was just the graphic nature of the crucifixion. And it is good for us to recognize that. I was thinking when Jeff was talking, and I won't go to preaching here, but when Jeff was talking, and there's a passage over in the book of Hebrews, I was just reading it the other day. I'll get my verse reference later. But he talks about how that we have suffered. And he said, but don't get all upset about that. And he says, look to Jesus. And look at all that he suffered. And he said, you haven't resisted. And he used the word bloodshed. And he said, you haven't spilt your blood like Jesus spilt his. And we live in a sanitized world. Now, when I was growing up, I didn't, because I grew up on a farm. The farm is not a sanitized world. I watched calves being born. I watched, have children here, don't I? I watched castrations when I was very young. And so I didn't live in that sanitized world. And the world in which they lived, the scourgings was very public. It was right out there in the open square. And these crucifixions were written about all the time because they were such, well, none of us lived during that time, I don't think. Do y'all remember the public hangings? I mean, everybody got dressed up to go see them. I know that's weird for us, isn't it? But they would go out, everybody would literally get dressed up in their suits, and the ladies would wear dresses, and they'd put their hats on, and they would go see the hangings. And these were the same kind of thing. And so it was the shame and all that. I'll quit. Ryan's got choir practice tonight. Very good. Very good. We need to see the crucifixion in all of its graphic detail, because it reminds us of all that Jesus did on our behalf. And it reminds us what it took for us to be saved. And as Jeff described, it motivates us. It's kind of like the guy bowing at the grave. Somebody gave his life so he could have his. It reminds us that make my life count for something. So we need to make our lives count for something, because Jesus bled and he died so that we could have that life. I'm getting emotional here. All right, let's stand and be dismissed. Brother Doug Cunningham, lead us in a closing prayer.